Konnichiwa, anime fans. This is the first anime portfolio brought to you by Anime Kyo UK for your entertainment and enjoyment. And I hope by renting this visual file on Japanese animation, you will expand your appreciation and help towards the next club video. My name is Carlo Bernhardi.
My personal journey would have started about 1985, when in the UK they started importing giant robot model kits. Some of them from Macross, Fang of the Sun, Crusher Joe, and just noticing that the artwork and the transfers kind of looked cartoonish. By that time, later in the late 80s, you've got Battletech using a lot of the Macross designs. The merchandise for Robotech coming over, toys, role-playing games, comics, all eventually flooded over. I noticed in a local comic book shop there was various fanzines, and one was a fanzine to do with Battletech and other sort of robot games. The artwork was done by Steve Kite, and some of the articles were done by Helen McCarthy, and she was putting together a video program for the big Easter science fiction convention held in Liverpool in 1990. So once I got the details of that, met up with people from that meeting and all those viewings of anime, I decided to make a fan club. I'd also been in contact with 2 other fan clubs in America, and that was through the translated manga that I bought. One of the issues of Appleseed had these addresses in, so I wrote to them. I got replies 3 months later. So I got to find like maybe 6 other people. The Easter Con convention, there was a good maybe 12 to 24, maybe 24 was pushing the limit, for a general discussion of, right, we all like this stuff, we should try and promote it. We need to also try and get companies to pay attention that animation is not just Disney or Bugs Bunny. And that was the big motivation, because there was also pushback, not only from companies but from other science fiction fans, that, oh, anime is not for me. But that's like saying film isn't for you. If you're into horror, sci-fi, fantasy, or soap operas even, anime and manga cover it. And that was what was exciting at the time. Helen McCarthy had a newsletter that slowly grew its readership. Not many in the first year, and by December 1991 she went to a pro magazine called Anime UK.
If you aren't already a fan of Japanese animation, you will be by the time you finish watching this tape, and you'll want to know more. Anime UK, anime, manga, worldwide fandom, music and trash culture. Latest releases, hottest news.
In 1991 we also had the first Anime Day convention in March, and beginning of the subtitled version of Akira in Art House cinemas from January 25th onwards. I saw it in Leicester, and I was also handing out flyers for my club. I also did a short screening of anime to a very niche film club. It was for Super 8, certain type of film stock, and I think I showed them Bubblegum Crisis first OVA, and I think it was around my half. And the editing in Bubblegum Crisis, they were taken aback, where there was like split screen, where it's sort of like diagonal from corner to corner. They're using film techniques, close-ups, long shots, and they just haven't really seen that in animation before. And also Bubblegum Crisis being that it's kind of taken from Blade Runner and Terminator, are very much in people's minds at the time. The two American clubs that I joined, and later was affiliated with one of them, was Anime Hashin and the EDC, which stands for the Earth Defense Command. They would have among their members people who were tape traders, who had friends in Japan who would then copy off the television or copy off laserdisc. But to watch NTSC, you needed to buy a specialist player. I had to make a trip into London to get that. Round about £400, which would be about a month's wage for me back then in 1990. Obviously there were companies in America who were just producing anime and subtitling it, Animaigo, whereas as you know Animaigo did Maddox and Riding Bean.
The big prize should be in the trailer. I'll unhook it.
Hey, wait a sec.
If the accelerator will stay put, take the wheel.
Bean! You idiot!
Sorry.
What's going on? I thought the trailer was gonna get wiped out! That roadbuster clown has found us! Things are going to get bumpy, so hang on!
Books Nippon, their sister company, was US Renditions, and they also produced Gunbuster. I was lucky to get those few 6 tapes from US Rendition and 2 from Animaigo before they then sent letters saying that the copyright wasn't in the UK and we can't sell you anymore. So almost like a cease and desist, but obviously then companies in the UK were taking note. Island World, they put out Akira, that did really well. Then they followed up with Fist of North Star. Also then, with my own club and also Pen Pals, we also swapped as many VHS tapes as we could record. Sometimes it doesn't matter how bad the quality was, because you knew that only maybe 30 other people or less in the country had got something or seen something. It was all new. And also hunting round department stores and just looking at the dubbed and butchered versions of anime, trying to find stuff that would come over from America, be horribly rebranded, and buy it. Most of the stuff came from American fans and some British fans, because although Laserdisc didn't really take off in this country, there were still specialist places and people still imported Laserdisc because they would have maybe the letterbox version of a film. This was when it was at least 6 months after it being in the cinema that a normal film would be even rental VHS, but you could get it on Laserdisc from America. I had people who had copies of Nausicaa and My Neighbor Totoro, and I think Kiki's Delivery Service, and they were able to link that up to machines that then would be able to copy that either direct to PAL or to NTSC on VHS and use other machines to get it to convert, and those copies are crystal clear. Of course, no subtitles, but that's because in conjunction with tape trading, the other big thing was scripts that someone had painstakingly translated and synopsis, a general overview and review of what you're going to watch. It was very difficult to tape trade to get series, because if an American tape is going to be 2 hours, that's not many episodes for a series at the time, which is 24 episodes, 26, or going into the hundreds. You just couldn't do it because it would take too long, and you could only really ask for maybe 2 tapes at a time, and you are talking about a turnaround between maybe 1 to 3 months, whether that was coming over by air from America or locally in the UK. It wasn't just stream something or burn something to DVD. You had to pre-plan and queue up stuff to make sure they got the right amount that fitted on the tape. Eventually things spread, and after that, obviously retail companies took notice.
Nani?
よくもひどい目に遭わせてくれたわね。もう許さないから。
you've seen how I got into anime. In this country, we've been first introduced via manga, by the translated comics. That was sporadic because compared to Marvel and DC, there's very few titles, but also the fact that it's another import, so it was just kind of random what the comic book shop got. America already had 2 fandoms from 2 anime series. Space Battleship Yamato was quite big because it was on syndication and it was probably the first serialized cartoon in America. And then later on Robotech was made. That had a fandom. People kind of grew up with those. And I also suppose at the time Star Trek Next Generation first came out. If you look at a lot of episodes, there's a lot of nods to anime in them. It was believed that at least some of the people working on it were anime fans. The British magazines that at least had it mentioned were Speakeasy, an in-house magazine for comic book shop. It promoted British and American comics. It had ties in with a Glasgow convention for comic book art, which they gave awards to mostly American and British comic artists and writers. But there was an international category, which Akira and Lone Wolf and Cub were mentioned a few times. Fantasia magazine, which again was some comics but was mainly sort of films and TV, science fiction, fantasy and some horror. Comics International, which was a comic book catalogue that covered indie comic, a film, TV, sort of science fiction fantasy magazine called Starburst. Starburst had a free area where you could put details of conventions, so Anime Day was mentioned in the February and March issue. Fantasia had a February issue, which was printed on the 28th of February. That seemed to combine the excuse of it being the Chinese New Year, so they thought they would do a whole series of things Oriental. So there was a 2-page write-up on the film Akira, a 2-page write-up of translated manga, and a small quarter of a page poster for Anime Day. And I think it was that magazine that also maybe had the blurb that Sheffield was putting on a Japanese comic convention. Other magazines featured again the poster for Anime Day, and throughout their run before March and after March did not cover Akira, even though it was doing the rounds throughout the country, and virtually never covered any manga. And nothing was ever followed up from the convention, nor was after February was anything ever said about Akira either, which was, I think, a bit of a loss for them. I'm probably the only person who took photos. I'm afraid I've only got about 5. The giant board game that was played with Pat Labor model robots in a cityscape. The other pictures I've got are the Divas table and the artwork that people did and the model exhibition. Obviously it was sponsored by Sheffield Space Centre and it was all done, as far as I'm aware, in a couple of months. I do also recall that the Japan Centre, they came and they sold out and they left within like 2 hours. They came with stuff, they sold stuff and they went. They managed to get a community centre for the day, 4 rooms for people to actually watch anime, and to show how the community of the fandom was, a large percentage of the people actually took anime so other people could watch. I think 6 or 7 of us provided anime for the convention. Animago also managed to send things that arrived on time. There were people in America that did fan subs, but a lot of the time we just watched stuff that was raw, just in Japanese. And if it was based on the manga that was already translated, then you kind of knew the story and the characters. Otherwise, within the comic book itself, there's mini synopses of most of the shows that people are going to watch. and I think showing how small it was, there was about 70 or 74 people who had pre-registered and paid by the end of February, so only maybe 10 days away from the con. And talking to Dave at Sheffield Space Centre, I think it went up to maybe a maximum of maybe 100 people. I later got letters from pen pals in the UK who were there who I didn't see, and it wasn't until the convention the following year, when it was in a hotel and over a weekend, that I actually got to meet them. That was the big difference. People went there to see anime.
彼女、ここの学生？
そんなことどうでもいいからさ。お前、うちらの同人誌買ってくれよ。おまけにとっておきのザンボット3のブループリントをセットでつけるからさ。
オタク買ってくれんの？
なんて気持ちいい若者じゃろう。
うちで出してるシベールはいいよ。
これからの30分、あなたの目はあなたの体を離れてこの不思議な空間へと入っていくのです。
With the success of releasing the dubbed and subtitled version of Akira, the sales of that, they then said, right, well, we'll make a new label and we'll call it Manga Video. First one they came out with was Fist of the North Star. They were then pushing most of the anime that at least had a fair amount of sex and violence in it. They were looking for 15 and 18 certificate stuff. Some of the anime they chose was heavily edited. There was prominent figures in the media eventually saying that, it's terrible, cartoons are going to change kids' minds and all that sort of nonsense that people come up with. But that was still a slow amount of exception. There still wasn't really anything on terrestrial TV to cash in on that. I think at the time we've probably only had the 4 or 5 channels. There was, I think, on the BBC, on 2 consecutive Christmases, the first dubbed version of Laputa, Castle in the Sky, was released. Because I remember putting a VHS tape and taping it off the TV at the time. That was the Streamline Pictures dub. Carl Maytek, who was the instigator of bringing anime to a wider American audience through creating Robotech. And he initially, I think, owned a art shop in San Francisco that he sold animation cells, and he started up the company with the premise of releasing dubbed anime in cinemas to as big an audience as he could find. There were a number of British companies that would spring up to release anime. There's Kaseki, Seda Video. With the success of Helen McCarthy's glossy magazine Anime UK, they dubbed KO Century Beast Warriors. There's also that English dub of Super Cat Girl Nuku Nuku, which has got a Liverpool accent. I believe there's also a version of Lum that looks like they've got a Brummie accent.
Are you telling me I've got to fight an alien invader?
That's about the size of it. Mr. Invader's people have given us an ultimatum. They've chosen an inhabitant of our planet at random, namely you, and said that if you can beat one of them in a contest, which I admit is unlikely, then...
I'll pack up my catsuit and go home.
What do you say, Yatsura? Will you save the planet and all mankind?
Fuck off!
I beg you, our civilization depends on you.
I am the simple oversexed son of a chiropodist. I will not take responsibility for the future of the human race.
The only other person who we definitely know who was a celebrity who knew about anime was Johnathon Ross. I'm sure back in the early 90s he may have even introduced some anime at late night.
Because if you were to strip away the contact lenses, the snazzy clothes, the £500 haircut and the endearing speech impediment which I've so carefully nurtured over the many years I've been on television, then you would see the otaku lurking within. And otaku has a very keen and special interest in tonight's programme. Otaku. People of many special interests.
A friend of mine, she used to tell her work colleagues that she was into cartoons and anime, and at first they thought, oh, you're being a bit silly, a bit childish, and then after Manga Video came out, it's like, oh, you're a bit weird and a bit strange. So it definitely changed people's opinion. Looking back at maybe the first couple of years of the titles they've released, for every 8 titles that were either a 15 or an 18 certificate, they would get maybe a PG or a U certificate that they could afford that might not sell very well, because obviously Sex and Violence sold really well, but would get other anime out there. But they did also fund Ghost in the Shell at their height, and I suppose their success of being when in the UK we had Virgin Megastores. There wasn't an anime section, there was a manga section, and any other company might be lucky to have one or two of their tapes mixed in with the manga video, but there was a separate section, not just bundled together in like World Cinema, but again either through big retailers or independents. It's still drips and drabs. There must have been escalation as a boom of other companies popping up 92 to 95, but once it started to take off, then I presume licensing probably got a lot more expensive.
ジード様に水と食料をありったけ出せ。さもなくばこの小娘の首を引きちぎるぞ。
長老、構うことはねえ。戦いましょう。
そうか。本当に引きちぎらねえとわからねえようだな。
You're looking at the time when you've got paper catalogues to order stuff from America, and also if you could provide the information, either Books Nippon, their bookshop in London, or OCS Books had a courier service. So if you knew the publisher, title, and the author, you could get Japanese manga, which would take several weeks or several months maybe before that arrived. Hence having versions of New Type magazine and some of the manga that was well known at the time. Anything else that would filter through would be via America and possibly through comic book shops. There was Streamline Pictures, who were doing the dub of Akira and Laputa and a few other Ghibli films. And obviously when they got Akira out in cinemas in America, they had the added publicity of it being in the back pages of the Akira comic. And through them, as well as through the catalogue called Advance Comics, you could order t-shirts. So that was t-shirts from like the film, but there was a t-shirt company in America called Graffiti, and they did t-shirts from No More from Cub and Akira. So it was mainly from comic books and manga. Then I think the other place that did t-shirts was Niku Animart, and they did a wide selection of popular stuff from Rambo Half, Lum, Area 88, Macross. By this time in the 90s, the sort of model craze had died down, so that was quite difficult getting hold of. Because Robotech was popular in America, a lot of their ephemera got shipped over. Novels, you can get those through the Forbidden Planet, because they had a very quirky thing that was to do with their warehouse. It was all one big warehouse, legally, so they could import, but not import stuff. Palladium Books did a lot of the role-playing systems. And in some of those art books, the last maybe half a dozen pages might be about Go Nagai, Gundam, and later on. So you would get snippets of actually where things originated from, because obviously a lot of stuff would be rebranded. There wasn't really any easy way to get bobbleheads, figurines, garage kits. It was all very limited through shops importing themselves or going through dedicated catalogues. Sometimes you could go to a toy shop and find model kits from Crusher or Lupin. Somehow they've been bundled in with their imports, or for some reason there was like die-cast miniatures from Sherlock Hound. Might have appeared at TV in London. So it was always, when you went to a different town or city, it was always worth finding a model shop or a toy shop. And even places like Boots the Chemist had their own line of VHS for kids. I've recently come across some information that shows this was a fanzine for science fiction fans in Birmingham, saying that in 1995 they could go to Leicester for one night to see Appleseed or Wings of Hieronymus. It was on at 11:15 at night for one day, and that was it, gone. And they would have to travel down from Birmingham. So even in 1995, when it was fairly established, I'm sure some series or OVAs or films did well if they were originally cinematic, because at least you've got the quality of animation. They knew who their age group was, and they knew sex and violence sold. So not always the best story or quality. And I suppose I always think the British fandom, some of us have different points of origin compared to Americans, because maybe our collection of anime might have been based on what translated manga comics we had, because at least then you knew the story. Otherwise you had no chance. If you think practically, anime gets made because the manga does well. Occasionally, yes, there is OVAs, which is akin to maybe crowdfunding, but again, that's hit and miss, and if it does well, people buy it. Equating what does well in fandom might not do well for the general public, or for a fandom in a different country, without all that background knowledge to help.
My hobby is to slowly peel the skin off the rabbits I catch, especially cute little bunnies like you. And my friend here is thirsty for blood. Sweet.
My beautiful face is ruined! You bitch, I'll make you suffer!
Stated early sort of 1991, where someone was saying how to disseminate more information, because everything was through fanzines and fan clubs. So that's through the post. Most fan clubs had maybe a newsletter maybe once a month, or maybe 3 or 4 times a year, so there'll be massive gaps in between, because if you're having a club magazine or a fanzine, it takes time to fill that up with artwork and articles, video game releases or anime releases, either in your own country as well as Japan, all sorts of time to correlate and then send off. People at university were lucky because British universities are linked to the American universities via cable and a service called Janet. They could easily log on to American servers and go to maybe rec.art.anime and find out information, translated scripts, synopses, sometimes artwork. And in this newsletter I was reading, the guy was explaining if you had a modem at home and a home computer, he would then give you instructions on how to log into this system. Once home computers became personal computers and you had slightly better modems, that meant that information was on a daily basis rather than a weekly to monthly basis. So those big clubs disappeared. I would say late 90s, a lot of the clubs were disbanded. They might have had local chapters because people still wanted to watch anime, but the information age was slowly taking over. And of course later on you would have the BitTorrent age and now the streaming age. Mine sort of kept going for a while and expanded through Europe. Somehow I got maybe 20 members from Poland. Somehow they'd heard about me. Even though there were maybe bulletin boards, you still needed to meet people and find out, because it was even such a niche hobby. One of the things my club and the other clubs provided was a list of pen pals and also members in your area. You might be the only person in the village, or you might find there's 3 people in your city that were into anime and manga, and that's the only way you found out. Going round to someone's house, huddle round like a 14-inch TV to watch anime. That kept going for quite a while. I suppose that also morphed into having more conventions so people could meet up. And that became like the new internet as well, because obviously you got to see more people and find out more things. Oddly enough, I wound down my club between 95 and 96. It had maybe a maximum of 350 members. Now when I joined the 2 biggest clubs in America in 1990, they were only just getting up to 300 to 400 members for the entire country. So you can see how niche that still was as a hobby. It's the most successful ones in America only had 300 to 400 people. I'm guessing sometime after 2000, when computers got better, people had broadband, you could BitTorrent stuff, and there was different software for chat rooms. So that's not part of my era, but I presume that's when things probably took off. On a personal level, it's something that was a new discovery of a new medium of entertainment that could be taken seriously, that elevated the art of animation from Saturday morning cartoons for kids to something that's aimed at teenagers, young adults and adults, that covers the same amount of genres that television and film does, with it being discovered, or at least looked for, in the late 80s, early 90s in the UK. It meant that it was really obscure, and also finding like-minded people was a great joy, and putting people in touch with each other was also a great joy. One of the reasons I started a fan club, to put people in touch as well as to give information and also spread anime, was to create community, and the fact that no one else was doing anything about it. It also has something childlike about it because it is animation, but if you're looking back at the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s, the animation is the special effects of its time. You couldn't do what in anime was done in cartoon format, you could not do in a live action film. And there's no way to physically manifest your imagination other than someone basically put pen to paper and then painted on plastic and made cells. It was at a time where I was diagnosed with cancer, so throwing myself into the hobby gave me a distraction and something to do. I wrote to the Japanese embassy, I wrote to Tokyo Animation College, I made my own flyers, I went to various cities, put flyers in comic book shops, stood outside cinemas, tried to promote it. Collectively, people were trying to contact the companies that were putting out their VHS kids cartoon hour or 2 hours of usually hacked anime, most likely dubbed in America, but trying to get hold of them to say there might be an adult audience for this. Obviously Island World took a gamble and created Manga Video and saw what was popular, and a host of other small companies in the UK and America popped up. It still would take years before it was on terrestrial TV. Besides the early 80s dubbed anime of Urusei 31 and Mysterious City of Gold, you've got Battle of the Planets. Then I suppose the only other hallmark one is maybe Pokemon, and that's late 90s, early 2000s. Seeing that from being a small video room at a major science fiction convention to having their own anime conventions. Also the fact that there were a few conventions going on from 91 to 95. After that is more throughout the country. On a personal level, the people I corresponded with, I'm still now in touch with. So that's from 88, 89. From writing letters that might take a week to reply to 3 months to get a reply. Of course now it's chat rooms, Facebook, Messenger, emails, video conferencing, brings people together. People have still got a nostalgia for what they grew up with or what they found. In a broader sense, all anime fans have something in common. Always easy to break the ice, and we're lucky enough that the industry is still going. Even after earthquakes and fires in Japan, there is so much to choose from now. It is also nice that people take an interest in what has gone before, because the animators in themselves either consciously or subconsciously, will be referencing things from their childhood, which might have been referenced from that show's director's or writer's childhood, as well as having the cultural bridge from Japanese culture, their love of technology, their love of the natural world through Shintoism and their religion of Buddhism, all those sort of Eastern influences coming over to the West, and also their animation style. I suppose much like Japanese cars, first they were considered a joke and inferior, and then they became quality, and now they're the one that people point to say, that's well made, that's well done, just on the technical aspect. So the animation has progressed. For me, it's an ongoing hobby and enjoyment and community. I'm still friends with the person I shared a room with at EasterCon back in 1990, and I introduced him to anime, and he was just blown away by the abundance of genres that were available back in the 90s. And being a sort of fantasy and science fiction fan, it's just comparable to any sort of film IP or TV franchise. There's so much of it to wonder at and look at. When I did start off my club, obviously that was mostly a local thing. One other person in the village was a member. I had 3 people from Loughborough that came down, 1 person from Leicester. I had a pen pal who was in Nottingham, I think I met maybe twice. But then club became national and then went international over the years. Meeting people at conventions was a necessity because a lot of them I'd only written to over a year or more, and it's nice to actually see real people and meet and discuss things. Whether it's your favourite show was, or whether it's something coming up new, from whatever age group is appropriate, or whatever genre, whether it's something you can relate to like a soap opera, or whether it's a really cool science fiction show, that's worth having a conversation about. You might say, I might have leaned towards being more of an isolated gamer, but at the time I was a groundsman. So I was doing a monotonous, physically hard job out in all weathers, but my own time and my free time and the money I saved for my job went to my hobby, which was anime, trying to track down sources of it and writing to companies and people. So that's a big difference. And also being a fanzine editor took up a huge amount of time. Tape trading, copying anime for others to find it, took up a huge amount of my free time. So yeah, I don't know what other hobbies or other interests I would have pursued, but it was like a full-time job. So much so that for the 4 or 5 years that my anime club ran consecutively, my mother was the one that typed out the correspondence on a electric typewriter. Because of my dyslexia, I found it very difficult to put words onto paper. And when I did, it was misspelt or mostly illegible. So she played a big part in communicating with people. But yes, it was all-consuming, really. Looking back with recent hindsight, I think I should have supported, at least paid up subscriptions to any magazines that were dedicated or just partially covering anime and manga, because I was so centered on my own club and having to produce a magazine for that. I'm pleased to have made a difference at the start, and hopefully nearing the end of my life that I've made a record of those pioneers that made it possible for companies to take notice and spend their money to hope that someone would buy their stuff. Otherwise, it would not be anime.
Club's main aims are to put fans in contact with one another, to exchange information, to promote popular Japanese culture, and, above all, to have fun. Thank you for listening and letting me ramble on, and not fast-forwarding the tape.